Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 24th day of July in the year of our Lord 2026. My beat is still war today, but with the added distinction of talking about what some choose to call war criminals. The question for today, then, is who gets to decide what a war crime is? Who decides if someone has committed one of those crimes he has defined as a war crime? The International Criminal Court, established by the 1998 Rome Statute and beginning operations in 2002, has been given the right to declare certain people war criminals, to issue indictments against that person which should involve arrest and prosecution. We know from our American system that charges and indictment do not make one guilty. But in the minds of certain people, it gives an opportunity for selectively prosecuting those with whom they politically disagree. The war crimes talk started again when New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani ran for office on the promise to arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if he ever came to New York. Well, Bibi has announced that he will indeed attend the United Nations meeting in New York City to be held in September. The mayor's plans, announced in an interview with the New York Times, brought a storm of protests from supporters of Bibi, including the President of the United States, who declared on social media that the mayor's plans would not and could not happen. In response, the mayor admitted that he is not the president, he's not even Congress or the U.S. Attorney General, so his plans would not be fulfilled. He went on video and said his legal team had exhausted, quote, every avenue available, end quote, under the law, and concluded, quoting again, we do not have the independent legal authority, end quote, to arrest the head of state of a foreign country who is attending a UN meeting which happens to be located in New York City. Some may have reacted with outrage if the mayor had ordered the NYPD to arrest Netanyahu. But since he is not now planning to risk that, those people are reacting with outrage anyway, calling him a dishonest politician. I want to leave the mayor for a moment, talk about war crimes in general, but I can't do so until I mention the First Lady of the City of New York. Yes, right, that's right. Right now, as I record this, she is conducting a conference for Muslim women with the stated purpose of informing them that Mary, yes, folks, that Mary, the mother of Jesus, who delivered the child on Christmas morning, was not only not Jewish, but was actually a Muslim. Well, how can that be? Well, it can't be because of a fact apparently unknown to the First Lady of our greatest city. That fact is that when Jesus was born that day on Christmas, Muhammad, the founder of Islam, was not going to be born for another 570 years. Well, be that as it may, facts are often lost on people today, especially when those facts do not fit that person's worldview. Back to the International Criminal Court, which issued the indictment against Prime Minister Netanyahu and has often referred to him as a war criminal. The ICC has no jurisdiction in the United States at all. The United States refused to join the 125 nations which signed the agreement. I remember the debates around it quite well. The U.S. representatives were afraid that it would be used to prosecute members of the U.S. military engaged in combat in some politically sensitive spot. Congress instead did the opposite by passing the American Service Members Protection Act, which was designed to shield the U.S. personnel from ICC prosecution. The ICC might be seen as a kind of virtue signaling organization, or perhaps it is deeply idealistic and committed to peaceful resolution of conflict. How does it select its targets, or how does it decide who is a war criminal and who should be left alone? Do you need to be engaged in actual war to be a war criminal, or can you simply commit acts of extreme violence? My own view is that the term war criminal or war crimes is decided by the winners. Would Hitler, his generals, and his bureaucrats, for example, have been criminals if they had won the war? Would some division of the UN have ordered them arrested? No, folks, of course not. But instead, many of them were hanged. Some chose suicide. as the best option. Over in Japan, several Japanese officers were hanged as war criminals. One general split his stomach open in 1945, but an American doctor saved his life so he could be hanged in 1948. Back in 1908, there was another tribunal, at that time held at The Hague, which decided to define rules for the conduct of armed conflict. The tribunal dealt primarily with humane treatment of prisoners of war, dignified rules for how civilians were to be treated. Keep in mind that in 1908, warplanes, poison gas, machine guns had not been invented. I don't think those people could possibly have imagined the horror that would rain from the sky onto civilian populations for over the next 100 years or so. I have studied the war archives from World War II as much as I could, especially after the internet made them all available to anyone. My conclusion is that the U.S. authorities went out of their way to abide by the rules of the Geneva Convention, which was part of the Hague series of international agreements. The Geneva Convention defined how prisoners of war were to be treated. Most nations knew that if they followed the convention, their enemies were more likely to do so. So, with a few exceptions, it was the policy of the United States to follow it. Even Nazi Germany followed it to a large degree. The Japanese, however, had other ideas. The treatment of American prisoners was especially brutal there. The percentage of prisoners who died in captivity under the Germans was about 2%, but under the Japanese it was more like 60%. Now let's return to Bibi for just a moment. Is he or is he not a war criminal? To some extent, it's a matter of opinion and is usually determined by the winners. Right now, I would call him a loser, at least in the matter of international politics and especially in the matter of armed conflict. He has no friends anywhere. Everyone in the UN except the United States hates him. His cities, his military bases are badly damaged by Iranian missiles and drones. But does any of that make him a war criminal? No, it doesn't. But he and his IDF have violated virtually every one of the rules for armed conflict established by the various international conventions I just mentioned. He has repeatedly targeted civilians and civilian infrastructure. In fact, he doesn't recognize the difference between civilian and military targets. Testimony accuses him of mistreating, even torturing prisoners of war. Many have accused IDF soldiers of brutally raping them with objects that destroyed their intestines. Testimony seems to indicate that he intends to destroy an entire people group through warfare and through starvation. I would call those things war crimes, folks. But remember, the victors get to determine such things. As long as the U.S. military is solidly behind him, it's hard to say he is defeated. In fact, he and his country most likely would cease to exist without the U.S. He would be arrested if he set foot out of Israel without U.S. protection. That brings up an interesting point, and that point is that if Donald Trump is his enabler, and before Donald Trump, Joe Biden received more money in the form of contributions, donations, bribes, whatever you choose to call them, does that make them war criminals too? During the Nuremberg trials of Nazi officers, a new charge was invented to cover the massive crimes of which those people were accused. Since the normal criminal code of any of the victorious Allied nations was insufficient, they invented the crime they called crimes against humanity. Is Bibi guilty of crimes against humanity? Is Donald Trump guilty? The president has vowed to attack civilian infrastructure as a result of Iranian attacks against Hormuz shipping and the deaths of U.S. soldiers. When I saw that a 19-year-old woman was killed in a missile attack against her base in Jordan, I was very distressed by that. Many of those men who landed on Omaha Beach were 19 years old, but they were not beautiful young women with babies ahead of them. In fact, those men fought for people back home just like her. They fought for each other, for their families, for their way of life, which were threatened by a terrible enemy. The death of that young woman just lays out the complete moral depravity that has infected this government and the entire globalist system. I pray for her family and that we can find a way to prevent such willful death and destruction in the future. Finally, folks, finally, we've talked about the subjective nature of the term war criminal, but sometimes a label may be appropriate. I'm certainly tired of sending teenage women to fight and die for the benefit of a foreign leader and his vision. This country seems to be looting our tax dollars for people who are not even American, might legitimately be called war criminals. God forgive us, folks, if that is true. At least that's the way I see it. Till next time, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.